I only have $2. Please let me shower at your home, cowboy, said the dirty Apache woman. It was a hot afternoon in Arizona, the kind of day that seemed to stretch endlessly under the blazing sun. Jack had just finished his chores on the ranch and was driving into town to pick up some supplies. The old truck hummed steadily along the dusty road as Jack looked out over the vast expanse of the land. The wide, open spaces stretched for miles, dotted here and there with patches of dry grass and the occasional cactus. It was a life he had come to accept, the quiet, solitary existence of a cowboy. The freedom was something he cherished, but at times the loneliness crept in like a shadow, and he found himself longing for something more. His mind wandered as he drove, thinking of the things he needed to do when he got into town. He had a list, of course, but nothing on it seemed too pressing. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the road ahead. As he rounded a bend, he saw something, or rather someone, that caught his attention. There, sitting by the side of the road, was a woman. She was a strange sight in the middle of nowhere, dressed in ragged clothes, her long black hair tangled and matted from days without care. She had a rough, weathered look about her, as though she had been through something tough. The sun beat down on her, and she didn't seem to be in any rush, just sitting there, staring at the horizon. Jack's first instinct was to keep driving. It wasn't that he didn't care, but people out here were often looking for something. A ride, a handout, maybe trouble, and he wasn't in the mood for any of it. But then, as he got closer, he saw the tiredness in her eyes, the kind of exhaustion that only came from days, maybe even weeks of struggling. Something inside him stirred. He couldn't just leave her there. He pulled the truck to a stop and rolled down the window. "You need a ride?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The woman looked up at him, her eyes narrowing slightly against the sun, as if weighing him. "Do you mind?" she asked, her voice hoarse but not unkind. There was something in the way she spoke, quiet, careful, as though she wasn't sure she could trust anyone anymore. Jack nodded, pushing the door open. "I'm headed into town. I can give you a ride if you're going that way," he said, motioning for her to climb in. She hesitated for a moment, as though deciding whether or not to accept the offer, and then slowly stood up. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as though every step was a battle against her own body's exhaustion. As she climbed into the truck, Jack noticed just how dirty she was. Her clothes were torn, her hands rough and calloused from hard labor, and her face was covered in dust, the remnants of long days on the road. Despite her worn appearance, there was something about her, something that made Jack pause. She wasn't just any traveler. She looked like someone who had seen hardship, someone who had been fighting for her survival for a long time. "Where are you headed?" Jack asked, trying to keep the conversation light. The woman settled into the passenger seat, glancing out the window before responding. "I'm not sure yet. I've been traveling for days, trying to find a place to rest. I've got a few things I need to take care of," she said, her voice trailing off as if the weight of her words was too heavy to say outright. Jack nodded, sensing that she wasn't ready to share much. He didn't press her. Instead, he focused on the road, the sound of the tires on the gravel filling the silence between them. The woman sat stiffly beside him, her eyes darting around as though she was looking for something, maybe a sign that she was safe, or perhaps something more familiar. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only noise was the hum of the truck's engine and the occasional rustling of the wind outside. Jack wasn't sure what to make of the woman. She wasn't asking for much, just a ride. But something about her was different from the usual travelers he came across. There was a quiet strength in her, a kind of resilience that Jack could respect. After several minutes, she broke the silence. "I'm sorry for asking, but—" "Do you have a place where I can clean up?" she asked. Jack glanced over at her, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. She wasn't looking at him now, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. "A place to clean up," he repeated, surprised by the request. She nodded slowly, her shoulders tense as if she expected him to turn her down. "I don't mean to be a burden," she said quickly, her voice a little more urgent. "I've been on the road for so long, and I haven't had a proper wash in days. I have only a couple of dollars left, but if you could let me use your shower, I'll be gone as soon as I can." Her words were rushed, almost pleading, as though she feared Jack would change his mind. Jack's mind raced. He didn't know why, but the thought of turning her away didn't sit right with him. He had a small cabin up ahead, tucked in the hills, far from the town. It wasn't much, just a place for him to sleep and eat. He didn't have much to offer, but he could offer her that. She wasn't asking for anything extravagant, just a shower and a little dignity. "I suppose I could let you clean up," Jack said slowly. "I've got a small place up ahead, not much to it, but it'll do for a shower." The woman looked at him, her eyes softening slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice had a new tone now, one of relief. "I wasn't sure if you'd stop or not." Jack shrugged, trying to downplay the kindness he felt for her. "It's no trouble," he said, his eyes back on the road. "You've had a rough time, I can tell. We all need a little help sometimes." She nodded, her gaze drifting back out the window as the truck rumbled on. Jack felt a strange sense of fulfillment, as if he had made the right choice. He didn't know why this woman had come into his life today, but he felt like it wasn't just by chance. As they drove along, the landscape slowly began to change, the desert giving way to the more rugged, hilly terrain. Jack's cabin wasn't far now. The two of them had barely spoken since she'd asked for the shower, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. Jack had offered her a place to rest, and she had accepted it. Neither of them knew what would happen next, but for the moment, it felt like the right thing to do. When they finally reached Jack's cabin, he pulled the truck into the small dirt driveway. The cabin was nothing fancy, just a simple wooden structure with a tin roof, nestled in the shadows of a few scattered trees. It was quiet here, peaceful in its isolation. Jack had built it himself, a small retreat from the busy world. He didn't expect anyone to come by, and he preferred it that way. He turned off the engine and looked over at the woman. "Here we are," he said. "You can use the shower. I'll put together something to eat while you freshen up." She smiled at him then, a faint, grateful smile that made Jack feel like he had done something important. "Thank you," she said again, this time with more sincerity. "You don't know what this means to me." Jack simply nodded and got out of the truck. As he made his way to the front door, he glanced back at her, watching as she slowly made her way inside, her steps lighter now, as if the burden she carried had been momentarily lifted. Little did Jack know, this simple act of kindness would change both of their lives in ways they could never have imagined. As the door creaked open, Jack stepped inside, the familiar scent of pine and wood filling his nose. It was nothing fancy, just the simple, rustic cabin he'd built with his own hands. The air inside was cool, offering a slight relief from the scorching heat outside. He turned, glancing back at the woman who had just followed him inside, unsure if she would feel comfortable in such a humble space. But then again, he wasn't sure where she had come from or what kind of life she had led, so it didn't matter much. The woman, still carrying the weight of exhaustion on her shoulders, looked around, taking in the rough wooden beams above and the sparse furnishings. There was a small kitchen area to one side, a wooden table, and a single chair near the window that looked out over the hills. The place was cozy but far from luxurious. It was a place of solitude, of quiet and simplicity. Jack had never minded it. After all, he preferred being on his own, away from the noise of town and the rush of the outside world. She stood still for a moment, looking uncertain as if she didn't know what to do next. Jack noticed her hesitation, and his gut told him that this wasn't just about needing a shower. She had been through something that made her cautious and guarded, and he couldn't help but wonder what kind of life she had left behind. "You can take the bathroom through that door," he said, pointing toward the small hallway at the back. "There's some towels on the rack, and the shower's all yours." She nodded but didn't move right away. Instead, her eyes lingered on Jack for a moment, as if she were trying to decide whether or not to speak. I don't want to trouble you too much," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I can manage on my own, I promise. She trailed off, shaking her head. "I don't know what to say," Jack smiled, trying to reassure her. "No trouble at all," he said. "You've had a rough road, haven't you?" Her eyes flickered briefly, as if she was surprised by his directness. Then, after a long pause, she nodded. "Yeah, I guess you could say that." Jack could sense that she wasn't ready to talk about it, and that was fine. He wasn't one to push people into sharing things they weren't ready to. "Well, take your time," he said, turning toward the small stove in the kitchen. "I'll get something going for dinner, maybe some beans and rice. It's not much, but it'll do." The woman gave a small, appreciative smile, and with that she finally moved toward the bathroom, leaving Jack to his thoughts. As she closed the door behind her, Jack stood for a moment, staring at the old wood paneling of the cabin. There was something about her that made him feel protective, though he barely knew her. Her presence had filled the quiet space, and Jack realized just how lonely he'd truly been. He shook off the feeling, focusing instead on getting the meal ready. The crackle of the fire in the stove was the only sound that filled the air as he worked. He didn't need to be told twice that the silence here was his favorite company, but now there was something different about it. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it was like he was sharing the space with someone, and the weight of the day's work seemed to ease for a moment. Meanwhile, in the bathroom, Rena was standing under the hot water, letting the steam rise around her. The warmth of the shower was a comfort she hadn't realized she needed so much. The journey had left her body sore, aching from long days of walking and hiding. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt clean, the last time she had allowed herself to feel human instead of just surviving. The grime from the road, the dust that had settled into her skin, melted away with every drop of water. Her tangled hair began to loosen, the knots slowly giving way to the gentle pull of her fingers. As she washed, she thought about the man who had offered her the shower, Jack. His kindness was something she hadn't expected, especially not from someone who lived so far from the bustling town, someone who clearly wasn't used to having strangers pass through his life. It made her pause. It was rare for people to help without asking for something in return, and yet here he was, giving her something as simple as a shower without hesitation. She closed her eyes, allowing the water to pour over her, letting the heat seep into her muscles. It felt good. It felt like she could forget everything for just a moment. But memories soon began to surface, unbidden. Her father, the days spent running, hiding from those who wished to harm her, the people who had come and gone in her life, all those faces that had been lost to time. She had never stayed in one place long enough to call it home, never allowed herself the luxury of belonging. The water started to cool, snapping her out of her thoughts. She stepped out of the shower, wrapping herself in one of the towels Jack had left for her. She ran her hands over her face, wiping away the last of the dirt. For a brief moment, she felt almost human again. She felt like herself. But then the reality of her situation came crashing back. She didn't belong here. She didn't belong anywhere. Her only hope was to keep moving, keep running, until she found somewhere safe. The kindness Jack had shown her was something she wasn't used to, and it made her feel vulnerable in a way she couldn't explain. She finished drying off and wrapped herself in the towel, stepping back into the small cabin. Jack was busy stirring something in a pot, the smell of cooking filling the air. He glanced up when she entered, and for a moment neither of them said anything. She felt a twinge of awkwardness, but then Jack spoke. "It's not much, but it'll do," he said, offering a small smile. "Beans and rice, figured it's easy enough." She nodded, her eyes meeting his for a moment. There was no judgment in his gaze, no sense of discomfort like she had often seen in others. It was simply a man offering a meal to another person, no questions asked. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "I really appreciate it." Jack gestured toward the table. "Sit down." "You're welcome here, just don't make yourself a stranger." She hesitated for a moment, but then sat down at the table, her fingers brushing over the rough wood. It wasn't much, but there was something comforting about the simplicity of it all. She had spent so long running from one place to another, never stopping to truly settle, to truly breathe. And now, here she was, sitting at a table with a man who barely knew her, yet was offering her the only thing he could give: shelter, food, and a little bit of humanity. They ate in silence, the meal warm and filling. Jack didn't press her for her story, and Rena didn't offer it. They simply shared the space, the unspoken understanding between them more than enough. Rena had been on the road for so long, she hadn't realized how much she had missed the small, simple things. The taste of a warm meal, the comfort of being somewhere safe. It was an unfamiliar feeling, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel a little bit of peace. The next morning, the sun rose early, casting a warm, golden light through the small window of Jack's cabin. The birds outside had started their chorus, and the world seemed to come alive in the quiet of the desert. Jack, already awake and tending to the morning fire, glanced at the clock hanging on the wall. It was still early, too early for much to be done, but Jack preferred to rise with the sun. The stillness of the morning was his favorite part of the day, the time when he could gather his thoughts before the demands of the day began. As he moved about the cabin, he noticed Rena still asleep on the small cot in the corner. Her face, which had been weathered by the journey, seemed more relaxed in the stillness of sleep. There was a certain peace to her now, the kind of peace that came from having a safe place, if only for a short time. Jack hesitated, unsure if he should disturb her, but then decided it was best to get things moving. He didn't want to make her feel like she was an intruder, but at the same time, she needed to know that she was welcome to stay. Jack didn't know how long she planned to be here, or even where she was headed next, but for the time being, they had shared a quiet moment together, and he felt responsible for ensuring she had some sense of comfort. Slowly, he walked over to the small table by the window and began preparing a simple breakfast. Eggs, a little bacon, and some coffee. Nothing fancy, but enough to start the day. The smell of the food began to fill the cabin, mixing with the earthy scent of the wood and the faint hint of sage from outside. Rena stirred, and Jack could hear the rustle of blankets as she sat up. He turned just as she rubbed her eyes and looked over at him. There was no surprise in her gaze, no discomfort at the idea of waking up in someone else's home. Instead, there was only a quiet understanding between them, a mutual respect that Jack hadn't expected but welcomed. "Morning," she said, her voice still a bit rough from sleep. "Good morning," Jack replied, offering her a small smile. "Breakfast is ready if you're hungry." She nodded, slowly standing up and walking over to the table. Her movements were a little stiff, as if her body wasn't fully awake yet, but she carried herself with a quiet grace that Jack couldn't help but notice. She had that kind of natural presence, the kind that made you pay attention without realizing it. Rena sat down at the table, her eyes glancing at the meal Jack had prepared. "You didn't have to," she said, her voice low but appreciative. "I could have gone without." Jack waved his hand, dismissing her gratitude. "No need to thank me," he said. "I've got more than enough and I don't mind sharing." They ate in silence at first, the only sounds coming from the soft clinking of silverware and the occasional sip of coffee. Jack could tell that Rena was deep in thought, her gaze far away as if she were thinking about something much bigger than the meal in front of her. He wondered if she was still worrying about whatever it was that had brought her to this place, still hiding pieces of her story. After a few moments, Rena put down her fork and turned to him. "I guess I should tell you more about myself," she said, breaking the silence with an air of resignation. "You've been kind to me, and I've taken up your time and your space without offering anything in return." Jack raised an eyebrow, curious but not pressing her. "You don't owe me anything," he said simply. "If you want to talk, I'm listening." Rena hesitated, then took a deep breath. She seemed to be weighing her words carefully, as though deciding how much to reveal. "I've been running for a long time," she began slowly. "Running from people who want to hurt me, my father. He was a leader of the Apache people. He taught me a lot about how to survive out here, but he also taught me something else. He taught me that I had to keep moving. If I stopped, if I stayed in one place for too long, I would be found, and they would find me." Jack listened intently, his eyes narrowing with concern. He didn't know much about the Apache people or their ways, but he could see the pain in Rena's eyes as she spoke, the weight of her words. "I don't know if I'll ever stop running," she continued. "I'm not sure I can. There are people out there who won't stop until they have what they want from me." Jack could hear the rawness in her voice, the fear she tried to hide. He could see it in the way her hands gripped the edge of her cup, as if she were holding onto something that might slip away at any moment. "You don't have to run anymore," Jack said softly, his voice steady but firm. "At least not here. You're safe in this cabin. No one's going to find you here." Rena looked at him, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "But you don't know what they're capable of," she said. "You don't know what I'm running from." Jack didn't argue. He didn't need to. He could tell from her eyes that she had been through more than he could imagine. But he also knew something else, that offering her safety, even if only for a little while, was the least he could do. "Whatever you're running from, it won't find you here. You can stay as long as you need," Jack said with quiet determination. Rena seemed to relax a little at his words. She didn't say anything for a while, as if she were trying to decide whether or not to believe him. But eventually, she gave a small, barely perceptible nod, as if she had accepted his offer, at least for now. For the rest of the morning, the two of them worked side by side in the small cabin. Jack tended to the fire while Rena washed up the dishes. There was something peaceful about it, something normal. The simplicity of the tasks, the quiet rhythm of their actions, it felt right, as though they had slipped into a routine, even though they had only known each other for a short time. After a while, Jack stepped outside to check on the horses. Rena followed him out, watching him as he tended to the animals. He moved with a quiet confidence, as though he had done this 1,000 times. It was clear to Rena that Jack knew his way around the land, knew how to survive in the wilderness. There was something calming about his presence, something steady and sure. As Jack worked, Rena stayed nearby, watching the sky change colors as the sun climbed higher. She didn't speak much, but Jack could tell that she was taking in everything: the beauty of the land, the sounds of the birds, the cool breeze that swept through the trees. It was as though she was letting the world around her soothe her, letting herself rest in the moment. After a while, Jack finished his work and turned to her. "You don't have to stay out here if you don't want to," he said, his voice low but friendly. "But if you'd like, I could show you the land. It's a peaceful place, and I think you'd like it." Rena looked at him, and for the first time since arriving at the cabin, she smiled. It was small, but it reached her eyes. "I think I'd like that," she said quietly. And for the first time in a long while, Rena felt something other than fear. She felt the stirrings of hope, the kind of hope that could grow when you were offered something simple, like kindness and understanding. In that moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find a place where she could finally rest. The days that followed seemed to drift by in a peaceful rhythm, unlike anything Rena had ever known. The cabin, small and humble as it was, had become a haven for her, a place of quiet refuge where she could escape the weight of her past, if only for a short time. She had come to appreciate the simplicity of life at Jack's cabin, waking up early with the sun, tending to the small tasks of the day, and sitting down for simple meals that filled her body and soul in a way she hadn't felt in years. Rena found herself growing more and more comfortable in Jack's presence. He was a man of few words, but there was a calmness about him, a steadiness that made her feel like she could trust him. It wasn't something she had expected when she first asked for a favor, but Jack had shown her nothing but kindness, without expecting anything in return. And as the days passed, Rena began to wonder what it would be like to live a life where she didn't have to be constantly on the run. One afternoon, as they sat outside the cabin, the warm breeze rustling the leaves of the trees, Rena couldn't help but ask the question that had been lingering in her mind since she first arrived. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Jack was sitting across from her, his long legs stretched out in front of him, his eyes scanning the horizon as if he were waiting for something. He didn't immediately answer, and Rena could see his mind working behind his quiet gaze. "I guess." "I don't know," Jack said after a long pause, his voice low but thoughtful. "I've spent a lot of time alone out here just doing my work, taking care of the land, but I've never really had much company. When I saw you on the side of the road, something about you made me want to help. It wasn't about what you could give me or what I might get in return. I just knew it was the right thing to do." He paused, then added, "Sometimes we all need someone to give us a chance." Rena nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude at his words. She had never had anyone offer her something without asking for anything in return. It was a strange feeling, one that she wasn't sure how to handle. "I've been running for so long," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't remember the last time I felt like I could stop. Every time I think I've found a place where I can rest, something happens. Someone comes looking for me. I can't seem to outrun it." Jack didn't speak immediately. He simply looked at her with a quiet understanding, as though he truly grasped the depth of her words. For a moment, neither of them said anything, the silence between them heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Jack spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to run anymore. Not here. You're safe. I won't let anything happen to you." Rena's chest tightened at his words. It was hard to believe, hard to let go of the constant tension she had carried for so long. But Jack's sincerity was undeniable. For the first time in ages, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find a place where she could stop running. Maybe this cabin, this quiet corner of the world, could be that place. Later that afternoon, after they had finished their chores, Jack suggested they take a walk. The land surrounding the cabin was vast, stretching out in all directions, with the rugged desert terrain gradually giving way to the more mountainous regions in the distance. Jack had always loved the land, loved the freedom it gave him, and he thought that perhaps sharing it with Rena would give her the same sense of peace it had given him. As they walked along the worn trail, Rena couldn't help but admire the beauty of the land. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the hills. The soft pinks and oranges of the setting sun bathed the land in a warm, golden light. It was a peaceful sight, one that made her feel as though time had slowed down just for a moment. "Do you come out here often?" Rena asked, glancing over at Jack as they walked side by side. Jack nodded. Yeah, I come out here whenever I need to clear my head. The land has a way of calming things down. It helps me think, helps me put things into perspective. They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds being the crunch of their boots on the dirt path and the occasional call of a bird overhead. Rena found herself lost in the quiet beauty of the moment, feeling a sense of tranquility she hadn't known in years. The world felt still, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to simply be present. Jack, Rena said after a while, her voice soft but serious. Do you ever think about what's next, about what comes after all this? Jack glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. I guess I've always thought about it, but I never really had a clear answer. I've been out here for so long, I don't really know what the future holds. It's not something I worry about, though. I take it one day at a time. Rena nodded, her thoughts drifting back to her own future. She had always been running, always looking over her shoulder, never letting herself stop long enough to think about what she truly wanted. But now here, in this moment, she realized that she didn't have to keep running forever. She didn't have to live in fear anymore. She had found something she hadn't known she was looking for: peace, safety, and maybe even a new beginning. As the sun set behind the hills, Jack and Rena reached the top of a small rise. They paused for a moment, taking in the view. Below them, the land stretched out like a patchwork quilt of desert, hills, and scattered patches of green. The cool evening air began to settle in and the stars began to twinkle overhead. It's beautiful, Rena said, her voice full of awe. I can't believe I've never seen anything like this. Jack smiled, his eyes following her gaze. Yeah. It's easy to take it for granted when you see it every day. But it's something special, isn't it? Rena nodded, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of calm, a sense that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The fear that had gripped her for so long seemed to loosen, just a little, as she stood there beside Jack, taking in the beauty of the land. They stayed there for a while, watching as the stars slowly appeared in the darkening sky. It was a quiet moment, but it was a moment that meant more than anything Rena had experienced in a long time. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that it could be something good. As the days continued to pass, Jack and Rena found themselves in a comfortable rhythm. Their lives had settled into a pattern of quiet, shared moments, working together on the land, preparing meals, and spending their evenings in peaceful silence, enjoying each other's company without the need for constant conversation. The cabin, once a place of solitude for Jack, had become something different now. It was a place of refuge for both of them, a sanctuary from the world outside. Rena had begun to feel like she belonged there, like she had found a place where she could stop running. And though Jack had never voiced it, he, too, seemed to be coming to terms with the idea that his life might be changing in ways he hadn't expected. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in the garden, planting vegetables for the coming months, Rena couldn't help but glance over at Jack. He was focused, his brow furrowed in concentration as he dug a small hole for a seedling. There was something about him, something steady and unshakable, that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't in years. The fear that had once dominated her life seemed to fade when she was with him. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to relax, to trust that she could be herself without constantly looking over her shoulder. Jack paused for a moment and wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. I've been thinking, he said, his voice low but thoughtful. We've been living like this for a while now, and I think it's time we start thinking about what's next. Rena looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat. What do you mean? She asked, her voice soft, unsure of what he was getting at. Jack met her gaze, his eyes steady. I mean, we've got a good thing going here. We've made this place into something better than it was before, but I think it's time we start looking forward. We've both been through a lot, and I know you've been running for a long time, but maybe it's time to stop running for good. Rena's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't realized just how much she had been holding on to until Jack's words sank in. The idea of staying, of not having to run anymore, was a foreign concept to her. She had always been taught to keep moving, to never settle in one place for too long. But as she stood there looking at Jack, she realized something. She didn't have to keep running, not anymore. You're right, she said, her voice trembling slightly with the weight of her own realization. I've spent so many years looking over my shoulder, never letting myself stop, but here with you, I think I can finally let go of that fear. I think I can finally stay. Jack smiled, his eyes softening with understanding. You don't have to make any decisions right now, he said gently, but I think it's time we stop worrying about what's behind us and start focusing on what's ahead. Rena felt a lump rise in her throat as she nodded. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid to face it. She felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, there could be something more for her, something beyond the constant fear and the running. And with Jack beside her, she knew that whatever came next, she wouldn't have to face it alone. The following days were filled with a sense of possibility that Rena hadn't allowed herself to experience before. She and Jack continued their work on the land, planting crops and tending to the animals. They talked more, shared more, and laughed more than they ever had before. Rena found herself opening up in ways she never thought possible, telling Jack stories about her life, about her family, her father, and the struggles she had faced. Jack, too, shared more of his own past, his quiet life on the ranch, and the solitude he had embraced for so long. The more they spoke, the more Rena realized just how much they had in common. They had both lived lives shaped by hardship, by loss, and by the need to survive. But now, in this small cabin, they had created something new. They had built a life together, and Rena couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what they had accomplished. The land, once a barren place of isolation, had become a symbol of their strength and resilience. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jack turned to Rena with a thoughtful expression on his face. You know, he began, I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about how we're both ready for something new. I think it's time we take that step. Maybe it's time we stop living in the past and start thinking about what kind of future we want to build. Rena turned to him, her heart racing. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jack took a deep breath, his eyes locking with hers. I mean, we've both got a lot of life left to live, and I don't want to spend it alone. I don't want to spend it wondering what could have been. Rena's heart skipped a beat as Jack's words sank in. She knew what he was saying, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel scared. She didn't feel the need to run. Instead, she felt a warmth in her chest, a feeling of belonging that she had never allowed herself to experience before. I don't want to be alone either, Rena said, her voice steady now. I've spent so many years pushing people away, never letting anyone in, but with you, Jack, I feel like maybe I don't have to keep running anymore. Jack reached for her hand, his grip gentle but firm. You don't have to, he said softly. You're not alone anymore, we're in this together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky filled with colors of orange, pink, and purple. The air was cool and refreshing, and the sound of crickets filled the silence around them. For the first time in a long time, Rena felt a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. The fear that had haunted her for so long seemed to have faded into the distance, replaced by a quiet sense of hope. She wasn't running anymore. She had found a place where she could stay, a place where she could finally build a life without the constant threat of fear. And as she sat there with Jack, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky, she knew that whatever came next, she would face it with him by her side. Jack squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with warmth and understanding. You don't have to go anywhere anymore, he said softly. This is your home now, and you're safe here, you're with me. Rena smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt like she was truly home.